All right, good evening, everybody. It is Saturday. It's our class live Zoom. I didn't get a message that anyone will be joining us, but here we go. Let's get in and do a little screen share here. And let's see, here we go. Okay, this week let me see here. Okay, how are we doing? All right. Okay. All right, so this week we're talking about learning and classical conditioning and operant conditioning, as well as language, which is a key component to learning, as well as our human experience, if you will. And we have some very good discussion questions, and your responses have been really, really good as we go back and forth in our discussions. So we're going to get right into the conditioning part of it, because this is one of the foundations of psychology. And we begin with a man named Pavlov. I think that name might ring a bell, pardon the pun. Anyway, he has a very famous experiment has been talked about through the psychological literature for many, many years. And you probably knew of this before you enrolled in any psychology class, or before you enrolled in this psychology class. This is written about and talked about, and just even in culture in our society. What happened? He was a Russian researcher, psychologist, scientist, and he noticed that he could get dogs to salivate by ringing a bell. And he did this simply by a period of time, ringing a bell just before he would give them food. And pretty soon, over a period of time, relatively short period of time actually, he discovered that just the bell alone, without even introducing food, would make dogs salivate. And there's a lot of applications for this in terms of teaching and learning and conditioning animals as well as human beings. You know, back 15, 20, 30 years ago, people were aware of this because this experiment took place, decades ago, many decades ago. But now you can, if you were a fan of Animal Planet or some of those network shows, they'll have people come in and rescue a family who has a out of control cat or dog or some kind of an animal, and they use this. They use this to train the animals. If you've ever trained a dog or a cat, you believe, whether you realize or not, you've used classical conditioning. Others have used it as well. The professional trainers, this is what they use. So, and again, we can do this with children. We can do this with adults. We can actually even do this for ourselves. And you have to be unconscious of it. So, the next slide shows us here what the stimulus or response would be. Okay, it's unconditioned stimulus, which is an item like food that triggers a natural occurring response. A conditioned stimulus. Okay, so we're going to, anytime you give food, like you actually start, your digestive system starts actually way before you start eating. It starts when you smell the food being cooked, and you start to salivate and things like that. So in this case with the dogs, like, he rang the bell, so that response, it evokes a response that's similar to that of even having the food there. So the unconditioned response, or UR, is the naturally occurring response to the unconditioned stimulus, and the conditioned response is the acquired response. So the unconditioned response occurs naturally. The conditioned response is something that you're conditioned to do. So the conditioned response in Pavlov's experiment, just to be clear, would be the ringing of the bell. This is used in therapy and, like I said, training, education. As you can see, from a phobia like a strong and irrational fear of a specific object, like people are afraid of spiders. So in classical conditioning, you will introduce, if you want to help someone get over a fear of spiders, which is often what's used, the therapist will start talking about spiders, which make someone feel uncomfortable even talking about spiders. Then they'll perhaps read a book about spiders, and they'll perhaps learn about the good that spiders do in nature and in our ecosystem. And they'll maybe introduce a toy spider, maybe across the room, and gradually, maybe even over a period of many sessions, bring that toy spider closer and closer to the person until they're able to touch the spider. Then introduce a real spider in much the same way. So that's classical conditioning. We can use this also with post-traumatic stress disorder. So if people have, obviously, in society today, we have a lot of people returning from, the battlefields, and they're afraid of loud noises or things such as that. So they're afraid of many different things. But in therapy, what I would do is discover what triggers the stress. Maybe it is, let's say, for instance, loud noises. So I would introduce, a soft noise and make it louder and louder and louder. Along with those noises, I would introduce something that is pleasant, like with the spider. Like as it gets closer and closer, you're also introducing something that is pleasant, like maybe someone likes ice cream. So if you're willing to let the spider come a little closer, then you get a bite of ice cream or Jello or whatever the case may be, or soothing music. I don't want to belabor the point, but I think you do get it. Operant conditioning is similar but different. It is learned based on the consequences of behavior and may involve the learning of new behaviors. Let me see. There are some researchers here, very famous. B.F. Skinner, probably the more famous of the two. And he created and designed environments called operant chambers, or what people typically call Skinner boxes, to study learning. He thought we could learn by conditioning. And he was a very strict behaviorist. That's how he raised his kids. And I think that's pretty well proven that it can't be just that. No one believes it's just that. There was a period of time when it was either conditioning or not conditioning. I think now we've come to realize that conditioning is a part of learning and training, but it is only part. My great example for this is you can think of kids or adults with operant conditioning. We're taught to put money into a vending machine and push a button, and we're going to get a reward. The rats will push a lever and they'll get the pellet to eat. That's in the lab. It works very well for people who operate gambling casinos with slot machines, because they let people win just enough, and it's not linear. Like it's not every 10 times you win. It could be every 10 or 12 or 20, and it would vary, sometimes every 3. And you put that money in that slot machine, hoping for that big rush, that big reward, that rush of dopamine that comes out when you're happy. And it is very addictive. It is extremely addictive. We know that biologically, psychologically, it's addictive, more so to some people than others, but pretty much to everyone on some level. And it works very well for the casinos, and they make lots and lots of money. You'll notice, I was watching an advertisement recently where a casino or a racetrack or something was saying how much money they paid out the previous year. They neglected to say how much money they kept, which is probably 10 times what they paid out. But again, that gets into framing, which is more of a social psychology discussion. Here we have the diagram of the rat and the food dispenser and the electrified grid. This is what is known as a Skinner box. Okay, so the cage is large enough for a rodent or bird. Contains a bar or a key that the rodent or bird can press or peck to release food and water. It also contains a device to record the animal's responses. So that's the Skinner box. That's operant conditioning. Watson's the other famous behaviorist that you talk about all the time, in addition to Skinner. And another really famous one. He very much goes hand in hand with Skinner. Let's just go back to the problem with trusting conditioning only is there are plenty of examples of how people, learn without being conditioned. We learn language. It's not just conditioning because we learn language as children. Mommy go to store. So no one says mommy go to store as an adult. They have to put some things together and discern some things and sort of figure some things out. And strict conditioning doesn't allow for figuring things out or solving problems in as much. But we know that human beings do that. We know that animals even do that. And we even have this thing called insight, where the example here on the slide is chimpanzees given a difficult problem began with a trial and error attempts and then stopped and seemed to contemplate the problem for a while. Seeming, we don't know. And then after a while, the seeming contemplation, the chimps seem to know how to solve the problem. Again, problem solving, they learn. Okay, so when you talk about learning by conditioning, here's an example of chimpanzees who learned, but it wasn't through conditioning. It was through trial and error and then a problem solving method. Intelligence is another part of this chapter, and there's generalized intelligence and specific intelligence. These names here, Spearman and Binet, these are some of the folks who developed some of the first IQ tests, and Terman, the Stanford-Binet intelligence test for Europe and America. I think it's important to touch on fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is more what we have when we're younger. You're figuring things out and learning new ways to solve problems and discovering alternative ways to create. And crystallized intelligence is when we have accumulated knowledge of the world and the way the world works through our lives. This intelligence may increase with age, but fluid intelligence tends to decrease with age. We have our IQ, which remains pretty stable over a lifetime, but when we're younger, we tend to problem solve. When we're older, we tend to rely on our experience. Defining and measuring intelligence is somewhat of a controversial topic. What kind of intelligence are there? Are there verbal and linguistic intelligences? Is there a mathematical intelligence? Is there a social intelligence? Is there a spatial intelligence? Interpersonal and interpersonal intelligence. So there are different kinds of intelligence: mechanical intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence. Someone like a gifted Olympic athlete or professional athlete like Michael Jordan or LeBron. I can think of LeBron's last name. Anyway, nonetheless, that's kind of funny. I can't think of the last name. There goes my crystallized intelligence. So anyway, they're gifted aesthetically. And is that an intelligence? Some argue that it is. Being able to sort of, like a Michael Jordan, for instance, or LeBron, being able to sort of, what they're basketball players, if you don't know, they sort of read the floor when they're taking their team down towards the goal they're going to, the other team's defending on. They can, so it requires some spatial intelligence and some anticipation and knowing who on the floor might move a certain way, who is fast enough, and who doesn't have the speed to get to where they need to be, or gymnasts perhaps would have that. Someone with that's kinesthetic intelligence, and um, spatial intelligence would be someone like a Picasso or a Michelangelo would have spatial intelligence. So not the traditional academic intelligence that we think about with linguistics and mathematics, but intelligence from the left. Person I like to bring up, I'm neither a fan or do I dislike the person, but there's I mean, you could pick any number of people, but Eminem is a rather famous rapper, and he didn't do well in school and ended up getting in trouble, but you can certainly make the argument that he is gifted linguistically. He is able to quickly, drop of a hat, come up with different rhymes that make sense and are fluid and flow that may not be your cup of tea or my cup of tea, but it does. There's no question that it has a rhythm to it. So, and there are others as well. So, interesting. We have now so many more individuals identified or diagnosed with autism than we did 30 years ago, which is not very long at all throughout the world, with the history of the world. Excuse me. Pardon me. But many of those, and it's not that they lack intelligence. People who are diagnosed with autism are no less intelligent, as it were. Autism is a communication disorder, so that they don't understand what's being said, or they cannot articulate sometimes what they want to say or what they want to communicate to you. But it doesn't mean they don't. Shouldn't say understand. They don't understand. They don't process it quite the same. So in many cases, there's savants. We call savant, which is someone who has been diagnosed with autism, who is a fantastic piano player. There are people who can tell you, if you tell them, June 12th, 1912, they'll immediately say what day of the week that was on. Or you could tell them, the third Wednesday in July in 1920, and they'll tell you what the date was. So in addition to that, there are a lot of times people who are diagnosed with autism, seems many of them are very good with technology, things that, figuring problems out where they can just focus. There's a company in Europe, I believe in Germany, that it's a tech company, and I saw an article probably a couple of years ago now where they were actively recruiting people on the autism spectrum to come and work in their factory, in their plant, to develop software or repair computers or build computers, because it is a very that kind of work. It doesn't require a lot of socialization, and people with autism, that's typically not we'd say their strong suit, because of the lack of the communication disorder, I should say. But that doesn't mean they can't perform and contribute to society, because they are very good. If you give them a task to work on a computer, they don't get distracted by the people around them to talk about last night's movie or sports team or whatever have you. So it's interesting. This is I think an ever expanding discussion on what actually is intelligence. And like I said, it is a bit of a controversial topic in academia. I'm going to say, when I first started studying psychology back in the late 70s, or even before that, but started studying it at the post-secondary level, there was this ongoing debate, are people influenced by nature, or are they influenced by nurture? Is it biology, or is it their environment? Thankfully, we've kind of put that debate aside, and we have kind of come to an agreement that it is both nature and nurture. And it may not be 50-50, and it may not be the same for every person. My learning or experience may come 60% from nurturing and 40% from nature. Someone else's may be 55 nature and 45 nurture. It really doesn't matter. I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. It does matter, but this idea that it's either nature or nurture, thankfully, has kind of been put aside, and we can look at it because environment does matter. I was reading recently a study of school-age children, and um, how disproportionate it is. Children who live or grow up in poverty, how much harder it is for them to succeed academically as well as in life. And it isn't, that's the only sort of determining thing is that they grew up in poverty compared to those who grew up affluent. You can get into the reasons why and these kind of things, but the study was very good in terms of looking at the cultural background and other factors and ruling those out, and just basically, and then also looking at some studies where they gave the kids who come from poverty the same opportunities that affluent kids have, and the difference is there. So that goes kind of beyond this lecture, but certainly something for further exploration. Now, here's what I wanted to get to. Is we kind of let's time to wrap up here. Emotional intelligence. Now, there is the intelligence that we talked about before, which is the traditional kinds of intelligence, crystallized intelligence, fluid intelligence, and that remains stable over a lifetime. And that's kind of what people look at. Like somebody has a high IQ or a low IQ, average IQ, whatever have you, and it kind of remains stable. And it's important. But more important than IQ is what we call this EQ thing, which is emotional intelligence, which is our social skills, which is essentially this is my definition and a pretty good definition of emotional intelligence. There are 4 components: self-understanding, self-management. Okay, so that's the first 2. So self-understanding self-understanding means I know when I'm starting to get upset. It means I know that I have strengths and I have some weaknesses, if you will, some things I'm not as strong at. I understand when I'm happy. I understand when I'm going to be upset. I'm starting to get upset. I recognize that. That's self-management. Then self-regulation, that's self-understanding. And self-management or self-regulation means, okay, when I start to get upset, I know that I need to drink some water, go for a walk, maybe spend some time alone, maybe read the Bible or some other sacred literature. That's the self-management part. In addition to that, like I know my strengths, I can help out in my church if they need someone to maybe speak on a given service, or if they need someone to provide some guidance and counseling to a member or a non-member, whatever. So that's the self-management part. Also, I'm not the person that they need to hook up the wiring to run the overhead for the PowerPoint. I'm not the person they need to put together the sound system. That's not my strength. So that's the self-management part. If I realize that we have some things to do with technology, my strong suit is not to get in and start working on it. My strong suit is to know who's good at that and be able to influence them to help out. So that's the self-management part. The next 2 components are social awareness. We had self-awareness, now we have social awareness. And then the other one is relationship management. Okay, so we got self-awareness, self-management. We have social awareness and relationship management, which is a little different than social management. So social awareness means, okay, I know who's in the room. I can pick up what kind of mood this is. If I walk into a party or if I walk into a room at work, I can kind of tell if people are up or down emotionally. Are they being productive? Are they goofing off? And then relationship management means this. It means that I'm able to influence those around me. And by influence, I do not mean manipulate. It means that I'm able to, when you manipulate someone, you're getting them to behave in a manner that serves yourself. When you influence someone, you're influencing them to behave in a manner or make a choice or consider a decision that is good for that person or for the group. So manipulation is self-serving. Influence is other-serving or group-serving, if you will. So those are the 4 legs of emotional intelligence, and that's we could talk about that until the cows come home. I do encourage you to learn more about that. There is a lot in the literature about it. Daniel Goleman, of course, is the one who gets a lot of credit for talking about these things. Um, he's not the first one though, but he's kind of the father of it right now, if you will. Um, so we're gonna look at that some more, and I do encourage you, because that's something that you can really use to your advantage. So with that, we're going to go ahead and end it. We'll keep you on it forever, since it has been, you know, there's no one here. It's been like a half hour of me talking, which kind of gets like to have some interaction. Nonetheless, I appreciate that you're busy. So it's pretty cool. Just real quick, I'm at a Panera Bread tonight because that's where my business took me on this Saturday evening, and but I can pop in here and before I head home and do my class live with you. So technology is a great thing. So I believe we'll go with that for rather than a scripture. We're going to go with the key phrase here for you to prove to me or show evidence that you watched this entire video is technology is a wonderful thing. That'll be our quote. Technology is a wonderful thing. So with that, I wish you all the best. I'm going to stop my screen share. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and end the meeting. I wish you the best, and I'll be talking to you soon. You know where to reach me if you need me. All the best.